Welcome to Intelligence Conversations. This October, in recognition of Mental Health Month, we're addressing a critical and often overlooked issue: mental health within the spheres of law enforcement and national security. Today, Neil Bisson, retired CSIS intelligence officer and now director of the Global Intelligence Knowledge Network, sits down with Treddenick, the president of ATNOH Group and a retired RCMP and CSIS intelligence officer. Al has been working towards understanding and supporting mental health in these high-stress professions. Together, Neil and Al dive into the unique emotional pressures faced by intelligence and national security professionals, how the intense, high-stakes environment can lead to issues such as post-traumatic stress injury, moral injury, and other psychological challenges that can sometimes go unaddressed. Al shares insights from his work with the Diversified Rehabilitation Group, a company dedicated to supporting their clients in a journey to healing and recovery, and how they serve as a valuable resource for professionals facing these challenges. Their discussion also touches on a critical dimension of mental health and intelligence work: the real security implications when adversaries seek to exploit vulnerabilities caused by untreated trauma. Join Neil and Al for this special Mental Health Month episode as they explore how these unique mental health risks impact the intelligence community and the crucial support needed to safeguard those serving on Canada's front lines.
October is Mental Health Month, and I am fortunate enough to have with me on today for Intelligence Conversations Al Treddenick. Al and I, if my listeners aren't aware, we do a podcast almost every week with Phil Gursky called Spies Like Us. And Al, who, much like myself, is a former intelligence officer with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, is a big advocate and has been doing a lot when it comes to mental health for first responders, national security and intelligence individuals, and national law enforcement. So I wanted to have him on to discuss what he's working on. I also wanted to discuss today how important it is not only for the individuals who work in that space that mental health is, but also how mental health is actually a huge factor when it comes to national security and why it is such. So hopefully without any further issues and any further ado, I'm going to introduce my good friend, Al Treddenick. Al, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks, Neil. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I love your podcasts, but I love Spies Like Us better. I'm a little biased.
You and everybody else.
Yeah. So, as you know, I started my career in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, doing general policing out west, and then was transferred into security service / CSIS. Did combined service of about 32 years before I retired, most of it being in operations in the counterterrorism field, both domestically and foreign operations. I went from there, once I retired, into BlackBerry, into their government relations division. And my position there was to develop a team dealing with intelligence, security services, and law enforcement around the world on behalf of BlackBerry as it related to lawful access, sensitive investigations, and any market access issues. Did that for a few years, 6.5 actually. All the fires were out. It got a little boring for me, so I decided I wanted to change, started my own consulting business in the global risk, corporate risk. And that took all my time, and now I'm trying to wind it down, but that doesn't seem to be happening too quickly.
So you've pretty much done the gamut then, Al. You've been law enforcement, national security and intelligence, then you've done to the private industry.
That's
So
right.
you basically you've done the trifecta.
Yeah, yeah, so to speak.
Mhm.
I also, being a former member of the RCMP, I am a member of the RCMP Veterans Association, actually the Toronto division, but I was asked to help out the national division on a number of things like corporate outreach. And through that, one of the things I took on was dealing with a company that specializes in PTSI, post-traumatic stress injuries, for first responders and military veterans, and started working with them and try to, one of the things we're trying to do in the RCMP Veterans Association is bridge a gap that occurs when RCMP members exit the force, whether they retire or discharge, and before Veterans Affairs, which provides the medical coverage, before that kicks in, there's a bit of a gap, and we're trying to cover that gap. And in particular, in the PTSI field or occupational stress injury field, I reached out to this company in BC, which specializes in the first responders and military veterans, PTSI. It's a
Now, for our listeners, Al, can you, because that term to me is new. So
so
PTSI, I'm used to hearing PTSD. So
right.
maybe for everybody, we can just clarify and you can kind of give me a rundown of what is PTSI as opposed to
Sure.
PTSD.
Well, it's basically the same thing. So PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. And so we've been working with that company. The company in BC is called Diversified Rehabilitation Group. And how I got involved with it is an interesting story, which you'll get a laugh out of here.
Hmm.
I happened to be visiting Kelowna, and a friend of mine. I was having coffee with a friend of mine, and he said, "Well, you're part of the RCMP veterans." He says, "I have a friend that runs this PTSD center for military veterans and police, emergency services, and fire." He says, "You should meet him." So, of course, I'm working with the
Hmm.
RCMP Veterans Association National Division as their strategic engagement director. And I put that hat on and I said, sure, I'll meet him because I wanted some money from this guy for the association. So
Right.
anyway, long story short, I did meet him. And the more he talked about his program and himself and how he got it started and his journey through himself had PTSI, that hat went off,
Hmm.
that corporate hat went off, and I said, we need you across this country because although there are other programs out there, this program has something different. And to me, I've attended their workshops. I've spoken to former clients that have been through other programs,
Hmm.
and the CEO of Diversified hates it when I say this, but this is the program of last resort for agencies that are trying to bring their employees back to work. So they specialize in first responder, military veterans, return to work
Okay.
programs, and treating the PTSI. So it's been quite the journey. I've continued working with Diversified to
Okay.
get them better known. I told the CEO that he needed to be known across Canada because nobody east of the Rockies had really heard of, nobody in the policing or fire or EMS had really heard of Diversified east of the Rockies. And over the last couple of years now, we have done that. We've had some very good success, mostly with the RCMP. We were trying to
Right.
broaden that. He was already working with the RCMP in
Hmm.
BC, but now there are other divisions across Canada sending members to his program. Now, this program
Okay.
actually has it's a residential program which runs there's a pre-program, then there's a 5 week
Okay.
residential program in a fantastic looks like a lodge. It looks like you'd want to reserve a room there. And it's truly fantastic. It's in the Okanagan Valley, just outside of Kelowna, up in the mountains.
Nice.
And after the 5 week there, they actually go 2 weeks, then they're home for some homework and integration back into the family, and then they come back for another 2 weeks, and then there's a 6 week follow up with it after that. And the interesting thing that really got me
Right.
was it's a very small cohort that goes through each time, a
Hmm.
maximum of 8 clients at a time. And these 8 clients tend to stick together even after the program. So they become a informal peer group. that each one, if each one starts, somebody starts struggling from the group, he or she has people that they can call that have been through the program with them that can help them. And the
Well, that's
success
great. Yeah.
statistics for the return to work and successful treatment of the PTSI is just astounding.
Right.
And as you can tell, I've drank their Kool-Aid. And if I can get them across Canada for working on behalf and getting better, helping the first responders and military veterans get better, then that's great. It's another tool in an agency's toolbox to help their employees. And yes, there are other programs out there, but not all programs work for everyone. They're very, they can be specialized, but I'll tell you, this one is, to me, was just amazing. And that's why I stuck with it and
Right.
advocated for this company with forming a partnership with the Veterans Association, which
Right.
we have.
That's great. Well, it sounds like it's a tool in the toolbox, like that's well needed. That there's a lot of people out there that can definitely take some advantage from this. So now you and I have both worked in law enforcement roles, and you did it with the RCMP, I did it with the Canadian Border Service Agency, and coming from that perspective, I'll throw this out there because I know for me, I am 5'7" and probably weigh a buck 90. So, and I worked at the Detroit-Windsor border. So I dealt with people on a day-to-day basis, and some of those interactions could have confrontational results because you're asking people to do things that they don't want to do, whether it's step out of a vehicle, whether it's seizing stuff that they shouldn't have.
Mhm.
There's prohibited. Maybe there's criminal activity involved. So there was always this expectation that any day that you were going to work, there could be a possibility of some sort of a confrontation, whether it's a verbal confrontation, a physical confrontation, or something like that. So that can weigh on you mentally. And from my personal perspective, I knew that there were days when it just felt like I had to go in and do another day of being the heavy, being the tough guy, being someone who had to tell other people what to do, which typically isn't my nature. I know that sounds funny because I'm always, making it sound like, hey guys, what are we going to do our next podcast? Who's going to do this? Who's going to do
Yeah.
that? I'm always bossing people around,
No,
but
you're
having,
absolutely right, Neil. I mean, in the first responder, and I'll include CBSA officers in the first responder community as well.
Mhm,
Uh, the first responders, police, fire, EMS, uh, they see things and are exposed to a lot of different issues and experiences that can cause psychological or emotional trauma.
mhm,
And if you don't have strategies to deal with that, it can lead to, in extreme circumstances, suicide.
mhm,
So, and we've seen police suicides on the rise,
mhm,
and part of that is attributed to the PTSI and not getting the help that they need. And it's not just external issues. It can also be internal issues. So internal
right,
inside the agency, whether it's
mhm,
bullying or other internal stressors, the relationship that management may have with the staff,
mhm,
employees, lots of different things internally, whether it's individual to individual or organization to individual. So
mhm,
it's both an external for the first responders and internal. Very similar to the Canadian Armed Forces members, especially for those members who were exposed to combat
mhm,
situations in Afghanistan and elsewhere.
right,
Um, the same thing applies if they don't get treatment for or help for things that are building up, it can lead to devastating consequences, whether it
right,
be conflict with the family internally. It can
mhm,
lead to substance abuse addictions. it can lead, and as I said before, it can lead to suicide as well. Um,
Right.
the way I look at it is like it's a jar full of marbles.
Hmm.
So you have a jar full of marbles. You go through some issue or witness some event, etc., and we can talk about moral injury. That's kind of the basis for it.
Hmm.
Uh, when you see something like that and it affects you emotionally or physically, you take a marble out of that jar. If
Right.
you don't have strategies or tools available to you or support that you could take a marble and put it back in as a replacement, what ends
Hmm.
up happening is you end up having marbles being taken out to the point where that jar
Hmm.
becomes empty. And when that jar
Right.
becomes empty, that's when the devastation occurs. So
Right.
places, and not just diversified rehabilitation group, but there's other ones out there that specialize in PTSI. Uh, they provide the support and the treatment. There's other groups out there like Wounded Warriors that does the peer to peer and other
Hmm.
things behind the badge.
Right.
There's a lot of different ones, but
Right.
it's so important that there be these tools in the toolbox for agencies to help their employees in mental wellness.
Right. Now, I want to go back to that analogy that you used about the um, jar and the marbles. Now, one of the things that we discussed off mic was, and I thought this was interesting, and maybe we can dive into this a little bit deeper, is that just because something affects you a certain way doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to affect somebody else a certain way. So you and I could go as law enforcement officers or as intelligence officers could go through the same situation,
Mhm.
and it could have a totally different impact on you than it has on me. So I could walk home, and if you stick with the analogy that you talked about, I could go home and I could take one or two marbles out of the jar because it really had affected me that day. And you could go home and put two marbles in your jar because you'd be like, it didn't affect me at all, and I had a great day, and this exactly. So I think what a lot of people need to take from this too is that when you're dealing with individuals and their own mental health, it's like anything else. It can be affected by different things in different ways and to different severities. So
Exactly.
you can't just look at one person and say, "Hey, listen, Al didn't have any issues with that whole thing that went down yesterday. How come you're the one who's having so many problems with it?"
No,
And
and
I
that's
think
exactly
hopefully,
right. And
yeah.
that's part of the problem or the issues that when I talk about internal,
Hmm.
that can happen where you have maybe supervisors, managers, or executives who just don't understand that. And you're absolutely right. They'll turn around and they'll say, well, how come Neil's affected, but Al wasn't? And, or the other
Right.
way around, or whatever. And,
Hmm.
that causes more stress on Neil or Al, whoever was experiencing it, right? Because
Right.
now they feel that they've either got to justify it or they feel inadequate or it's just doesn't help the situation. In fact, there's been a study done not too long ago by I think it was the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, uh, that found that police services in Canada are losing more members now to resignations than they are to
Hmm.
retirements.
Wow.
And yes, and a lot of that happens to be mental wellness and some systemic structural issues
Hmm.
with the way police forces are set up and run. Uh, but a lot of it is the mental health and mental wellness of their members.
Right. So we talked a little bit about from a law enforcement perspective, but I want to shift into the national security and intelligence realm because, I mean, you and I both have worked that realm. We know that I personally feel that the pressures that I felt as a law enforcement officer compared to an intelligence officer were very, very different. Yet, they still had an impact mentally. So, from a law enforcement perspective, it was an immediate situation where you had to deal with something. It could have been conflict, and you basically needed to make sure that you took care of that immediately. As an intelligence officer, was always almost like this overhanging pressure because you're dealing with national security issues. You and I both dealt in the counterterrorism perspective.
Yep.
And in the back of my mind, and I don't know about you, Al, but I know for me, a lot of the times, in the back of my mind, I knew that there was always the potential that something could go boom in the middle of the night and you wanted to ensure that you were doing the best you possibly can every day to keep that from happening. So it's almost like a continuous feeling of pressure to make sure that you're doing what you need to do. Now, you add on top of that some of the other aspects of the job. You're asked to move quite a bit. You have to be very quiet about what you do. Immediate family, okay, maybe they can know, but you don't really have a huge support group outside of the people you work with because you're not going down to your local pub and saying, you guys think you had a rough day. Boy, you should have seen what happened to me in this,
I missed the
because you
bomb. Yeah, yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly. You know, so,
yeah.
you had mentioned this too. You talked about how they're seeing a large number of law enforcement officers leaving because they're just getting to the point that they no longer want to continue doing that job. Now, we've seen over the years, the service, we'll use the service because it's a good example for both of us to speak about. We've got a lot of people that are leaving the service too and going to other jobs within the government.
Mhm.
Now, part of that has to do with maybe they just think it's a better opportunity, but there are these other issues that need to be dealt with. So, can you give me an understanding from your perspective on some of the pressures that are affecting individuals that are working national security intelligence?
Well, again, it's the same thing. It's things that you've already mentioned, right? There's
Mhm.
internally, it is the call it the secrecy part of it. I'm a little of two minds on that one. Canadian Security Intelligence Service is not a secret agency. Everybody knows
Mhm.
about it. It's a public agency.
Mhm.
What the operations are all about, yes, that's secret, and you can't
Right.
tell. So, I'm a little. Uh, I'm a little on the fence about about officers not being able to tell their family and friends where they work. I mean, it's one thing to be able to tell you say where you work. Another thing to you don't tell them about the operations and all that.
Mhm.
Also internally, it's you must maintain your security clearance. So there's those pressures of not being in a position where you can be compromised. You have to maintain a lot of integrity
Mhm.
and honesty. And that's sometimes that's hard to do in the
Right.
intelligence business. Because
Mhm.
especially on the operations side, when you're out in the field, because you're not always being honest with people you're dealing with,
Right.
and I mean that can wear on you, and that's where we kind of go into the external factors, but also internally is like I said, it's the bullying, it's the
Mhm.
maybe the promotional system, or what the
Mhm.
priorities are, etc. Can lead
Right.
to things like leaks, which we've seen.
Yep. Mhm.
Uh, there's a lot of factors internally, and same with the external side. And I'm just gonna talk a little bit about the moral injury because I think it sets it up nicely to explain from an intelligence officer's point of view uh, this whole notion. And it's a guide that was published by the Canadian Institute for Public Safety Research and Treatment. It's called CIPSRT.
Okay. Mhm.
And it goes on, it says, a moral injury can arise from circumstances where a person does or fails to do something that violates their morals, ethics, or deeply held personal values. A moral injury can also arise when a person feels betrayed or witnesses others behaving in ways perceived to be morally wrong. Exposures to potentially morally injurious events can impact psychological, emotional, social, and spiritual domains and have negative outcomes, mental health challenges, addictions, etc., or positive outcomes like moral growth. So we kind of, as the intelligence officers, I think that covers
The gambit.
especially, yeah, the gamut for when you're recruiting,
Mhm.
when you're running sources, you're handling human sources, and
Mhm.
all the trials and tribulations and the elation of some really good work that's done. You have to be able to juggle all those balls, and that can be wearing on you. And as you said earlier, if you go home or you go to the bar, you can't talk about the negatives or positive aspects of it with just some Joe in the bar. You've got to keep that to
Right.
yourself. And really,
Mhm.
you can't really. you can't really talk to your family about that.
No.
Either. I mean, you can probably be cryptic with a spouse or significant other, but it's still, they still don't understand
Hmm.
what you've really gone through. It's much like first responders, whether it's police, fire, or EMS, going
Hmm.
to an incident and witnessing, some horrific stuff,
Hmm.
and other people just can't relate to that. Or it's the same in the Canadian Armed Forces, that if anybody's been in a conflict zone and they've been in combat, how do you explain that to somebody who's never experienced that? And the only
Right.
time they get to see it is in the movies or on the news.
Hmm. And it's funny that you mentioned that too, because I think one of the things that doesn't really happen in media nowadays is they don't show so much that negative side that a lot of individuals who work in intelligence and national security have to deal with. And I'll give you a perfect example. You and I both worked abroad, and you know that when you're working abroad, you have to wear several hats. You're trying to liaison at the same time you're trying to collect information.
Mhm.
You know that there's potential that um, either the host organization or other organizations might take a run at you to see if maybe you would be interested in providing more than you should be providing, because
Right.
that's all part of the game.
That's right.
So, you go back to what we talked about how you can't necessarily have those conversations and you don't want to have those conversations. And anybody who shows an interest in what's going on in your life, you automatically have a level of suspicion surrounding what that is, which for most people would look at that and say, hey, listen, you just met
Mhm.
some person in a bar who's having a conversation with you. Why are you so worried about just having a
Or yeah,
conversation?
or why are you so defensive? Yeah.
Exactly. And, going back to how that affects your immediate family, I know for myself, when I was abroad, my wife at the time, I mean, it was difficult because it was a dangerous operating environment. It was a denied operating environment. I couldn't tell her what I was doing, but she did know that if anything went wrong, it was going to be a major impact. Like you're talking about getting rolled up, probably being arrested, being held, and then, all these other things that could potentially go wrong.
Right.
So when you're calling home and you're saying, "Hey, listen, I got to be out tonight because I'm busy doing stuff." In the back of their mind, they're thinking, "Oh God, does this mean, what happens if he doesn't get home by 10 o'clock? What happens if he doesn't get home by 11 o'clock? When do I start to worry?"
When do
Kind
I
of
call
thing.
the ambassador?
Exactly,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And all these other sort of situations. And then a lot of people don't see that in the media. You never see James Bond calling, his significant other saying, "Hey, listen, I might be a few
You
more
mean
minutes late,
Moneypenny?
but don't."
Sure, he
Yeah,
did.
exactly.
But she
Don't
worked
don't worry,
inside. Yeah.
everything's just fine. So these are stressors that affect you as an individual and affect you and your social dynamics, your social interactions with the people that you care about most. And it's a pressure that they have to carry as well.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just while you're working.
Yeah.
It's also when you leave, when you retire,
Yeah.
or you move on to something else. That moral injury and PTSI can stay with you. And you may not think it affects you right now. It may affect you a little later. Like you said earlier, it affects people differently.
Hmm.
Uh, and that's why post-employment treatment and support is extremely important for
Hmm.
especially for first responders and military veterans, but I will include the intelligence community as well for those reasons.
Hmm.
It's that moral injury that can just keep eating away at you and taking those marbles out of that jar. And the last thing you want to do is end up with a jar that has no marbles in it. And then if that
Exactly.
happens, you're in a pretty bad spot.
Yeah. Now, I don't want to go too far into this interview or this conversation without us discussing the fact that there are certain safety nets
Mhm.
within law enforcement and within even the service themselves that people can go to, because you can't just walk down to your local, you can't go to your general practitioner and say, "Hey, listen, I need to see a psychiatrist because I got some issues and I need to talk about some things," because the things that you're going to talk about might necessarily be at a top secret level, right? So there has to be an apparatus within that system that demonstrates that you can talk to them and it's a safe space. You're not worried about it's disclosing any secrets. You're not worried about putting yourself in a situation where you're going to give up anything from a national security perspective. You're not going to endanger yourself from the Secret Security of Information Act. You're not going to be able to, be put up on any charges. So
Yeah, you're
we
bang
don't
on.
want to leave
You're bang
we don't
on.
want to leave our we don't want to leave our listeners with that impression that there is nothing. But I think what we're talking about here is that it goes beyond that. And this is what I think you're talking about with diversified rehabilitation group is that there's a sometimes that's not enough, or sometimes there's just not enough resources put into that. So with
That's right.
diversified rehabilitation group, you got a little bit more.
Yeah, and no, absolutely. I mean, there has been some conversations I've had with law enforcement leaders who said, "Why would I send somebody to BC for treatment when we have facilities that are in my province that are good enough?"
Hmm.
And I said, "That's exactly the wrong approach. Good enough." I
Right.
said, "Do you think your employee thinks it's good enough?" And
Hmm.
that's kind of why I call diversified the support of last resort, because it's beyond that. It's you know what really got me was I emceed their symposium last year, and when I started off, I told the delegates, I said, you're going to hear about the programs. You're going to hear about first responder mental health and the culture of first responders and military, and how that is different from the general public. And I said this particular program. Oh, you're also going to hear from people who have been through it, including
Hmm.
spouses, because
Hmm.
diversified will include a spouse or a support person to
Hmm.
help their client. Uh, so you're going to hear all of this. And I said, I think
Hmm.
I've kind of figured out what the secret sauce is. Let's see if you do. And it was a 2-day symposium. At the end of the day, I was wrapping up. At the end of the second day, I was wrapping it up. And I said, remember, I said this, you're going to see something. I think you're going to see what the secret sauce is. I said, I'll tell you what I think it is. And there's two things. One is they treat every client like it's family, like their family. It's
Hmm.
amazing. They remember the names, they remember the spouses, they remember the circumstances. I don't know how they do it, but they do it. And I saw them talking about it and their interaction with people who had been through the program a couple of years beforehand, and
Hmm.
it was just like old home week. So they're individualized that way, and they treat everybody like family. And I
Right.
think because they're small enough, they have small cohorts, and they're able to focus on those people,
Hmm.
on those clients, whereas the bigger programs can't really do that, and
Right.
to the same extent. And the other thing is with this program, part of it has been formulated. Some of the treatment programs have been formulated with input from first responders. So
Right.
it's pretty cool stuff, and just to see the success from this group has been amazing. So
Well, it's good to hear.
that's kind of why I thought, we need these people, right. We need this program, whether it's diversified or not, right
Hmm.
across Canada. And like I said at the start, it's another tool in the toolbox for
Right.
agencies, because I've had agencies say, well, we just signed a contract with so and so.
Yeah.
And I said, well, that's fine. Not talking to you about diversified replacing your contract. This is just another tool to help your employees.
Tool to
So if
have. Yeah, for sure.
that support agency is not isn't working for your employee, here's another tool that
Here's
you
another
can use.
tool. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I,
And I mean, once that's recognized across the country by first responders, then I think you know the whole community would be better off.
right. So I'm looking at the time here. We got a little less than 2 minutes. So I want to dive into just quickly. One of the things that we talked about off mic was this is a national security issue from the perspective of individuals who work with high level clearances
Mhm.
are going to be targeted, right?
Absolutely.
And we know as intelligence officers, if you want to go old school, you could say money, ideology, compromise, and ego. Those are the things you look for, right? Now,
Well, yeah, it's,
every
I have a little issue with that. It's a little more complex than that, but
it
if you want
is.
to bring it down to
Yeah,
the mice, then
right.
yeah,
It's
you can
mice,
do
right?
that. But there's, as you know,
Right.
there's far
Human
more,
beings are much more complex than that, but for the
and they're
time that we
fluid.
have
They'll
left,
change over time.
exactly, those things change. But what I'm trying to get to is that these issues also have an effect on your mental health. And
Yep.
this is what foreign agents and foreign adversaries are looking for. So if you have an intelligence officer who's got issues with any one of those things or somewhere in there, and they're not getting the help that they need, there's a potential compromise. Now, I'm not saying everyone who has a mental health issue is a potential compromise. What I'm saying is that would be something that a foreign adversary might look at to
Definitely.
say, hey, maybe we can use this against them.
Definitely.
So this is why I'm saying what we're talking about here goes beyond just, well, you know what? So you got a bunch of crybaby law enforcement people, and you got a bunch of crybaby intelligence officers who aren't getting the mental health that they need. Oh, boo-hoo. Well, here's the issue. This is what we're
Or
talking,
any government employee who has access to
or any government employee.
classified
That's
info.
that's
Yeah.
a right. But what we're talking about here is that goes beyond that, because now you're talking about potential concerns in relationship to whether or not those same individuals could be compromised or might be compromised.
That's right.
And if you want to eliminate that, you need to look at these types of organizations, these types of groups, and this type of help to keep that from getting worse.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The support needs to be there for mental wellness of all the employees.
Right. So we're getting down to less than a minute here. Al, I want to thank you for all of the time that you gave me today and explaining this to people. I'm going to make sure that all of the links are going to be added into the show notes so that if people want to click on this and find out more about the Diversified Rehabilitation Group, or if they want to reach out and find out
Awesome.
more, they'll be able to do that as well. So anyway, I'm sure I'll be seeing you tomorrow so we can talk spies like us. But again, thank you very much, Al, for taking the time, for being on Intelligence Conversations.
Well,
And
th-
hopefully we get to talk to you again.
hey, thanks for having me, Neil. It's been a pleasure. The more we can get this message out there, the better.
All right. Well, you take care, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Intelligence Conversations. We appreciate you taking the time to explore the important topic of mental health with us. If you found value in today's discussion, please consider liking, sharing, and leaving a comment. It helps spread the word and reach those who might need to hear this message. And for anyone who may be struggling with mental health challenges, remember that help is out there. You can visit diversifiedrehab.ca to learn more about the support available through Diversified Rehabilitation Group. Reaching out to a healthcare professional is a step toward support and healing. Asking for help isn't a sign of weakness, it's a powerful act of courage and strength. Take care, and thank you again for listening to Intelligence Conversations.